few creative partnerships in country music history were as productive, or as painful in their unraveling, as the one between Dwight Yoakam and guitarist and producer Pete Anderson. For nearly 2 decades, the two men built something extraordinary together. Anderson's instinct for sonic texture, his mastery of the Telecaster, and his deep understanding of the Bakersfield tradition meshed perfectly with Yoakam's voice, his songwriting instincts, and his uncompromising artistic vision. Albums like Guitars, Cadillacs, and This Time bore the unmistakable fingerprints of both men, and the results were some of the most critically celebrated and commercially successful records in the neo-traditional country movement. But behind the scenes, the relationship was eroding. In 2004, Anderson filed a lawsuit against Yoakam for breach of contract, alleging that Yoakam had failed to fulfill scheduled concert obligations and that the cancellations had caused serious financial harm, particularly given that Anderson had invested his own resources in preparing for those shows. The legal filing also pointed to deeper, longer-simmering tensions, disagreements over management decisions, business priorities, and the direction of their shared enterprise. The lawsuit was settled out of court, its terms sealed from public view. But what couldn't be sealed was the damage to the partnership itself. The collaboration that had produced some of country music's most enduring work was over. In the aftermath, Yoakam took more direct control over his own production, a shift that changed the sound of his subsequent albums. Both men have spoken about the period with carefully measured words, acknowledging the value of what they built while navigating the pain of how it ended. For fans, it remains one of the more bittersweet chapters in Yoakam's story, a reminder that even the most powerful creative bonds are not immune to the pressures of business and ego and time. If the Anderson lawsuit was a private rupture, Yoakam's legal battle with Warner Music Group in 2021 was a very public declaration of war, not against a former collaborator, but against the corporate machinery that had profited from his work for decades. The dispute centered on ownership rights to his early catalog, including the landmark Guitars, Cadillacs album, and hinged on the Copyright Act's termination provision, a legal mechanism that allows artists to reclaim rights to their recordings after a designated period, typically 35 years from the original release date. Yoakam's legal team argued that Warner had failed to honor the termination notices he had properly submitted, continuing to distribute and profit from his early recordings without his authorization. For a man who had spent his entire career fighting to control his own artistic identity, the idea that a corporation could continue exploiting his most foundational work without his consent was not something he was willing to accept quietly. The case wasn't just about money, though money was certainly part of it. It was about recognition, ownership, and the right of an artist to determine how his legacy is managed and monetized. The lawsuit was settled in 2022, with terms remaining confidential. But the act of filing, it sent a message that resonated across the music industry. Yoakam joined a growing number of legacy artists using the Copyright Act's termination provision to reclaim leverage over work they had created, often under contract signed when they were young, inexperienced, and in no position to negotiate from strength. His willingness to take that fight public and to follow through on it became something of a rallying point for other artists navigating the same treacherous waters of corporate music ownership. One of the more unexpected chapters in Dwight Yoakam's story is also one of the most revealing. When he collaborated with alternative rock iconoclast Beck on his 2012 album 3 Pairs, the pairing struck many observers as puzzling on the surface. What could the architect of slacker-era indie rock possibly have in common with the patron saint of Bakersfield honky-tonk? As it turned out, quite a lot. Beck co-produced 2 tracks on the album and brought with him a philosophy of creative freedom that pushed Yoakam in directions he hadn't explored in years. The most symbolic moment came during the recording of A Heart Like Mine, when Yoakam laid down a scratch vocal and guitar track, playing electric guitar, an instrument he rarely fronted, and Beck told him to keep it. Just like that, unpolished and immediate, exactly as it came out. For a man who had spent decades refining and honing his craft, being encouraged to embrace imperfection was both disorienting and liberating. The collaboration introduced Yoakam to a younger audience while deepening his existing fans' appreciation for his range. Songs from that period wove pedal steel guitars around layered harmonies and unexpected rhythmic textures, creating something that felt simultaneously classic and contemporary. More than the sonic results, though, the Beck partnership revealed something about Yoakam's character, his willingness, even at a stage in his career when most artists coast on their reputation, to remain genuinely open to growth and surprise. It was in many ways the same instinct that had driven him out of Nashville in the first place, the refusal to let anyone else define what his music was supposed to sound like. Dwight Yoakam has always been, at his core, a storyteller. His songs are populated with characters, drifters, heartbroken lovers, working people navigating loss and longing, rendered with the kind of specificity that separates great songwriting from mere craft. So perhaps it should come as no surprise that when he turned to acting, he approached it with the same instinct for emotional truth that powered his music. His breakout film role came in 1996 with Billy Bob Thornton's Sling Blade, where he played Doyle Hargraves, a volatile and menacing presence whose cruelty unfolded with quiet, unsettling precision. It was the kind of performance that makes audiences forget they're watching a musician playing a role, the kind that demands to be taken seriously on its own terms. Yoakam delivered exactly that, earning widespread critical praise and establishing himself as a genuine dramatic presence. He followed it with a memorable turn as the cold, calculating Raoul in David Fincher's Panic Room in 2002, and accumulated credits across films like The Newton Boys and Crank, alongside television appearances that demonstrated his range across genres and tones. He was drawn consistently to complicated characters, men whose inner lives were fractured and interesting, men whose behavior couldn't be reduced to simple moral categories. It was the same quality he looked for in songs, and it made him a natural for the kind of character-driven storytelling that resonates long after the screen goes dark. His directorial venture, the 2000 Western South of Heaven, West of Hell, was a more complicated chapter. Written, directed, co-produced, and scored by Yoakam, the film assembled a remarkable cast: Vince Vaughn, Bridget Fonda, Billy Bob Thornton, but struggled to translate its ambition into something coherent. Critics found it disjointed and overwrought, and the film failed commercially. Yoakam reportedly poured personal funds into completing it after investors withdrew, absorbing financial losses that strained relationships within his inner circle and contributed to broader professional turbulence in the years that followed. It was a costly lesson in the difference between creative vision and directorial experience, but it was also, characteristically, a risk that Yoakam took with both eyes open. So, what exactly has Dwight Yoakam confirmed at 68 that people always suspected? Not a single scandal or salacious revelation, but something more fundamental and, in its own way, more surprising. He has confirmed, through his own words and the accumulated weight of his choices over 5 decades, that the man on stage was always the real man. The stubbornness, the authenticity, the refusal to bend, none of it was a performance. It was a philosophy applied consistently across music, film, business, and personal conviction, even when it was expensive, even when it cost him relationships, even when the industry he loved pushed back hard. He fought Nashville when Nashville told him he didn't belong. He fought Warner Music when a corporation tried to hold on to work that was his by right. He fought his way through a painful public legal battle with a man who had been his closest creative partner for 20 years. He made a movie that lost money and earned bad reviews, and he stood behind it anyway. He collaborated with Beck when the obvious choice would have been to play it safe, and he rediscovered something essential about his own artistry in the process. At 68, Dwight Yoakam isn't confirming rumors so much as he's confirming a truth that was always there for anyone willing to look closely enough. The hat, the jeans, the twang, the swagger, none of it was a costume. It was a man telling you exactly who he was from the very beginning.